The silence in Greenhaven Cemetery was broken only by the soft brush of autumn leaves against the polished marble of the tombstones. Harrison Sullivan held the bouquet of white lilies tightly in his hands, his fingers pressing down on the stems hard enough to leave imprints on his palm. 5 years. It felt simultaneously like an eternity and a blink of an eye since Eleanor had left him. The CEO of Sullivan Enterprises kept his routine unchanged on this particular day, waking up at 5 a.m., cancelling all meetings, driving 40 minutes to Westchester County, and walking the same winding path to his wife's grave. It was his private ritual of penance, his moment to confront the what-ifs that had haunted him since that fateful night. But today something was different. In the distance, a small figure stood next to Eleanor's grave. Harrison slowed his steps, intrigued by the unusual presence. A boy, no more than 4 years old, placed a bouquet identical to his own, white lilies, Eleanor's favourite, on the marble that Harrison knew so well. Time seemed to freeze when the boy turned around. Harrison felt his heart skip a beat as he took in the boy's features, the same determined chin he saw every morning in the mirror, the same blue-grey eyes that were his trademark. It was like looking at a photograph of yourself from 30 years ago. "Mason, honey, don't run too far." A familiar female voice cut through the air, and Harrison saw Mackenzie Reynolds emerge from behind a nearby oak tree. She stopped abruptly when she saw him, her face losing all colour. "Kenzie." Harrison's voice came out more as a hoarse whisper. Mackenzie Reynolds, Eleanor's best friend since college, the woman who practically disappeared after the funeral. "What? Who is?" "Harrison," she responded, instinctively pulling the boy closer to her. "I knew this day would come eventually." Harrison's world began to spin as the pieces fell into place. The boy's age, the white lilies, the eyes that were a mirror of his own. Eleanor was pregnant, Mackenzie added, her voice shaking slightly. "She found out a week before the accident." Harrison staggered back, his legs finding a nearby stone bench. The last words Eleanor said to him that fateful night echoed in his mind. "We need to talk about something important." She never got the chance to tell. "Why?" was all he could articulate, his eyes fixed on the boy who was now partially hiding behind Mackenzie's legs. "It was her last request," Mackenzie responded, unshed tears shining in her eyes. "She made me promise at the hospital, Harrison. She was dying and she made me swear that I would protect the baby. From you." The word hit Harrison like a punch in the gut. "From me?" "You were consumed with work, Harrison. 70, 80 hours a week at the office. Eleanor spent nights alone. Important events were cancelled at the last minute because of emergency meetings. She feared the baby would grow up the same way she lived her last years, always in the background." Mackenzie's words were sharp knives, each one finding its target with painful precision. Harrison looked down at his hands, still clutching the bouquet of lilies, now slightly crushed. How many times had Eleanor prepared dinners that went cold on the table? How many wedding anniversaries have been celebrated with hurried text messages? "Mason," Mackenzie's soft voice broke the heavy silence. "This is Harrison Sullivan. He was very special to your mother." The boy, Mason, stepped hesitantly from behind Mackenzie, his curious eyes studying Harrison with an intensity that was painfully familiar. "Do you bring flowers for Mom, too?" The simplicity of the question made something inside Harrison snap. "Yes," he managed to reply, his voice breaking. "White lilies. They were her favourite." "I know." Mason smiled, a smile that was pure Eleanor. "Aunt Kenzie tells me stories about her every night." Harrison looked at Mackenzie, who was watching the interaction with a mix of apprehension and resignation. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Yes, we do." She nodded, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "But not here, not today. Mason needs to go back to school and you—" She hesitated. "You need time to process this." Harrison wanted to protest, wanted to demand answers to the hundreds of questions exploding in his mind, but he knew she was right. This moment, this meeting, was crushing enough. "Here's my card," Mackenzie said, holding out a small rectangle of paper. "Call me when you're ready to talk." "But Harrison—" His eyes hardened slightly. "Remember, I promised Eleanor I would protect Mason. I won't break that promise." Harrison watched as Mackenzie gently guided Mason down the gravel path. The boy looked back once, waving shyly, before disappearing behind a bend. Harrison sat on the stone bench long after they left, the lilies forgotten in his lap, as he stared at Eleanor's tombstone and tried to imagine how his life would change from that moment on. The autumn wind continued to whisper between the tombstones, carrying with it the last golden leaves of the season. Somewhere, a church bell rang, marking the passage of time in a world that, for Harrison Sullivan, had just been turned upside down. Harrison remained in his office at Sullivan Enterprises for hours, Mackenzie's card twirling between his fingers as his mind relived every moment of that morning at the cemetery. The reflection of the city of Manhattan through the windows of the 42nd floor was beginning to tinge with the orange tones of the evening, but he had barely moved since he arrived. His secretary, Sandra, had tried to alert him about 3 important meetings, but for the first time in his career, Harrison didn't care about the business that had consumed his life in recent years. Mackenzie's words echoed in her mind. She feared that the baby would grow up the same way she lived her last years, always in the background. Finally, with shaking hands, he picked up the phone. 3 rings later, Mackenzie's voice answered, tense and cautious. "We need to talk. Today." Harrison's voice was firmer than he expected. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mason has swimming until 6. I can meet him at 7 at Riverside Park, near Pier 84. The public location was no coincidence. She still didn't trust him completely. "I'll be there." The park was relatively empty when Harrison arrived, except for a few late runners and people walking their dogs. Mackenzie was already waiting for him on a bench overlooking the Hudson River, her red hair blowing gently in the river breeze. "You look exactly like her now," Harrison commented, moving closer. "The same worried expression Eleanor had when she was about to give me bad news." "Not bad news, Harrison," Mackenzie replied, gesturing to the seat next to him. "They're just complicated. 5 years, Kenzie. 5 years without telling me I had a son. And how many years did you spend putting work above all else? Above Eleanor?" His words were sharp, but his tone was more sadness than accusation. "Do you remember your last wedding anniversary?" Harrison frowned, trying to remember. "Did we have dinner at home?" "No. You were in Chicago closing the merger with Midwest Tech. Eleanor prepared an elaborate dinner, wore her best dress, and spent the night alone with a bottle of wine and tears that she never let you see." The memory hit Harrison like a punch in the gut. That merger had doubled the company's value, but now he realized the true cost. "When she found out she was pregnant," Mackenzie continued, her voice softening, "she was determined to do things differently. She wanted a father there, someone who could see her first smile, hear her first words. And she decided I wasn't going to be that father without even giving me a chance." The pain in his voice was palpable. "She planned to tell you that night, Harrison. There was a special dinner prepared, a little box with baby shoes." Mackenzie swallowed hard. The accident happened earlier. Harrison closed his eyes, remembering the voicemail that never returned, the dinner that never happened. And in the hospital. She knew she wasn't going to survive. The doctors were clear about that. But the baby... There was a chance for the baby. She made me promise to protect it, to raise it with all the love and attention she wanted to give. Mackenzie took something out of her bag, a yellowed envelope. "She wrote this for you." With shaking hands, Harrison opened the envelope. Eleanor's delicate handwriting filled his vision, bringing tears to his eyes. "My love, if you're reading this, it means I haven't been able to tell you in person about our greatest gift. Forgive me for my earlier cowardice, for not demanding more of you, for allowing us to grow so far apart. This baby is our second chance, Harrison, not for us, but for you. I ask that you respect my decision to entrust your creation to Kenzie. Not because I don't love you, but because I love you too much to see our son grow up feeling the same loneliness I felt. When you are ready, when you can see that there is more to life than professional achievements, seek it out. It will be your greatest achievement. With eternal love, Eleanor. Harrison folded the letter carefully, his vision blurry. What is he like? Mackenzie's face lit up. Brilliant. Stubborn like you. Loves building things with her blocks, always questioning how everything works. She has her smile, you know, and that contagious laugh. I want to meet you, Kenzie. Properly. Harrison. Not like the man I was. Like the father I can be. He turned to face her. Give me a chance to prove that I can be different. For Eleanor. For Mason. Mackenzie studied his face for a long moment, searching for something in his eyes. It won't be easy. Mason has a routine, an established life. And I promised. You promised to protect him, and you can keep doing that. But he deserves to know his father, don't you think? Silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the Hudson and the distant noise of the city. Finally, Mackenzie nodded slightly. Start slowly. Maybe you could come to dinner with us tomorrow. Mason is always calmer at home. It was a small step, but for Harrison, it represented a whole world of possibilities. What time? The elevator in the Upper West Side building seemed to rise more slowly than usual as Harrison nervously adjusted the package in his hands. After hours of research and 3 different stores, he had chosen an age-appropriate Lego building kit, a decision that now, standing outside the door of apartment 12B, seemed simultaneously inappropriate and excessive for a first date. Before she could ring the doorbell, the door opened to reveal Mackenzie, wearing an apron stained with tomato sauce. You're 15 minutes early, she commented, a tentative smile on her lips. I'm sorry, Harrison ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that Eleanor used to find adorable. I couldn't concentrate at the office. First time in a while that you've been out before 8. The comment had a touch of provocation, but also an uncomfortable truth. Harrison walked into the cozy apartment, immediately noticing the touches that screamed, home. Children's drawings pinned to the refrigerator, toys organized in colorful baskets, a blanket folded over the couch. It was so different from his minimalist impersonal coverage. Mason's finishing up his shower, Mackenzie explained, returning to the kitchen where a pot was bubbling. He's a little nervous. I spent the afternoon explaining who you are. And how did he react? Out of curiosity, mostly. He always asked questions about his father, but I kept the answers vague, following Eleanor's wishes. She stirred the sauce thoughtfully. Now I realize that perhaps I was unfair to both of you. A sound of small footsteps interrupted the conversation. Mason appeared in the hallway, wearing Spider-Man pajamas and hair still damp from his shower. He stopped when he saw Harrison, his blue-grey eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Hi, Mason. Harrison knelt down to the boy's level, his voice softer than he had ever used in any business meeting. I brought you something. Mason looked at Mackenzie, who nodded encouragingly before walking over. Her small hands touched the package carefully, as if it was something precious. Open it, Harrison encouraged, watching every expression on his son's face. His son, a reality that still left him dizzy. Mason's face lit up when he saw the Lego kit. Wow! It's a space laboratory. He hugged the box to his chest, his eyes shining. Aunt Kenzie, can I ride after dinner? If you eat all your vegetables, she replied with a smile, exchanging a meaningful look with Harrison. Over dinner, spaghetti and meatballs that Mason declared to be the best in the world, Harrison discovered that his son had a passion for astronomy, knew the names of all the planets, and dreamed of building rockets one day. Each new piece of information was like a little jewel that he guarded carefully. Mommy also liked stars, Mason asked suddenly, his eyes fixed on Harrison. Harrison's fork stopped in mid-air. Yes, she loved it. On summer nights we used to... He swallowed hard, long-buried memories resurfacing. We used to go up on the roof of our apartment with a telescope. She knew all the constellations. Like Orion? It's my favorite, Mason exclaimed excitedly. Exactly like Orion. Harrison smiled, noticing for the first time that the boy's smile was identical to Eleanor's. She said he was a warrior who protected the night sky. After dinner, as Mason meticulously arranged the Lego pieces on the coffee table, Harrison and Mackenzie watched from the kitchen. "He's amazing, Kenzie," Harrison whispered. "You did an amazing job." "Eleanor did the hard part. She entrusted us to him." Mackenzie absently dried a plate. "But Harrison, if you're going to be a part of his life, you need to understand that it can't be the same as before. Mason needs consistency, real presence." "I know. I've already started making changes. I delegated 3 important projects today. I scheduled a meeting with the board to restructure the company's leadership." He paused, watching Mason count the pieces with concentration. "For the first time in 5 years, I feel like I'm waking up from a nightmare of my own making." "Mr. Harrison?" Mason's voice interrupted them. "Can you help me? There are some difficult parts here." Harrison's heart skipped a beat when he heard his name on his son's lips. "Of course, champ." He moved to sit on the carpet next to the boy, who immediately began explaining his building strategy with adorable earnestness. Mackenzie watched father and son pore over the Lego instructions, their heads close together, the same expression of concentration on their faces. It was as if the universe was slowly correcting a 5-year-old mistake, piece by piece, moment by moment. When the clock struck 8:30, Mason was already fighting sleep, his explanations about the functions of the space laboratory becoming increasingly drawn out. "Time for bed, young man," Mackenzie announced, earning a sleepy protest. "But we're not done yet." Mason yawned, rubbing his eyes. "We can continue another day," Harrison suggested, his heart clenching with hope. "If your Aunt Kenzie allows it, of course." Mason turned to Mackenzie with pleading eyes. "Please, Aunt Kenzie, Mr. Harrison knows how to build Legos very well." "How about Saturday?" she suggested, smiling when she saw their faces light up. As Mason said goodbye with a hesitant but sincere hug, Harrison felt something inside him shift. There, holding his son for the first time, he finally understood what Eleanor always tried to tell him. Some things are more valuable than any professional success. The morning after dinner, Harrison sat in his meeting room at Sullivan Enterprises, facing the 11 board members with a determination he hadn't felt since the company's earliest days. The silence that followed his announcement was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Do you want to reduce your executive responsibilities?" Richard Montgomery, the oldest member of the board, adjusted his glasses as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. "Harrison, you built this empire. Sullivan Enterprises is you." "No, Richard. The company is bigger than any individual." Harrison slid a folder across the mahogany desk. "The restructuring plan I developed distributes my current duties among 3 executive vice presidents. I will maintain strategic oversight, but I no longer need to micromanage every decision." "Does this have anything to do with the rumors that you were seen with a child in Riverside Park?" Patricia Chen, always direct, asked what others were hesitant to mention. Harrison took a deep breath. "Yes, I recently discovered that I have a 4-year-old son, and I don't plan on making the same mistakes I made with Eleanor." The mention of Eleanor silenced the room. Many there remembered her kind smile at corporate events, the times she showed up at the office with homemade lunch for Harrison. "Gentlemen, ladies," Harrison continued, his voice firm, "over the last 5 years, I've turned my grief into an obsession with work. We've grown 300%, expanded to 3 continents, but at what cost? How many of you missed important moments with your families because of impossible deadlines I set?" The discomfort in the room was palpable. Harrison knew he had touched a common wound in the corporate world. "I'm not abandoning the company. I'm proposing a more sustainable model of leadership, one that allows us all to have lives beyond these glass walls." After 2 hours of intense discussion, the board approved the restructuring plan. Harrison left the building at 5 in the afternoon for the first time in years, carrying only his laptop and a small box of personal items from his desk. On the way home, He stopped at a bookstore. The children's section was unfamiliar territory, but he was determined to learn. A young staff member helped him select books appropriate for Mason's age, including some about astronomy that made his eyes light up as he remembered his son's interest. His phone buzzed with a message from Mackenzie. "Mason hasn't stopped talking about the space lab. He's asked 3 times if you're really coming on Saturday." Harrison smiled, quickly typing, "I wouldn't miss it for anything. Can I bring lunch?" The answer came quickly. "He loves pizza, but no pepperoni. It makes him sneeze." Every little detail about Mason was precious, like pieces of a puzzle that Harrison was eager to put together. He wanted to know everything. Your favorite colors, your fears, your laughs, your quirks. At home, Harrison spent hours rearranging his apartment. The guest room, which served as a document depository, was emptied. He researched online about decorating children's rooms, suitable colors, safe furniture. Maybe he was hasty, but something inside him told him he needed to be prepared. In a box at the back of the closet, he found a photo album that he hadn't opened since the funeral. Eleanor smiled on every page, her green eyes shining with love and life. One photo in particular caught his eye, them in Central Park, her wearing a blue flowery dress, laughing at something he had said. It was taken weeks before the accident. Did she already know about the pregnancy? The phone rang, startling him. It was Sandra, his secretary. "Mr. Sullivan, sorry to bother you, but Midwest Tech is insisting on speaking with you about the new joint venture proposal." "Sandra, remember when you told me your daughter had a ballet performance last year?" "Yes," she replied, confused by the change of subject. "And I made you work late that day, so you lost." "Mr. Sullivan, that was a long time ago. I'm sorry about that. From now on, you leave at 5, no exceptions, and tell Midwest Tech they can schedule a meeting with Claire Thompson. She's taking over international negotiations." After hanging up, Harrison returned to the photo album. There was an empty space between the last photos, where Eleanor used to keep her future dreams. Now he had a new dream to put there, a photo of himself and Mason, perhaps on the same bench in Central Park, where so many memories were made. His cell phone vibrated again. Another message from Mackenzie, this time with a photo. Mason sleeping, cuddling with the Lego instructions, a small smile on his lips. He insisted on sleeping with the manual so he wouldn't forget where we left off. Harrison felt tears in his eyes. How could you miss so many moments like this? How many smiles? How many discoveries? How many firsts had he missed in the last 4 years? "Thanks for sharing this," he replied. "He asked if you're really a builder of big buildings like I said." Harrison laughed. "Technically, I only finance the construction." "Try explaining that to a 4-year-old who thinks you're practically Bob the Builder." The conversation continued into the night, Mackenzie sharing little stories about Mason, Harrison absorbing every detail like a thirsty man in the desert. When he finally went to sleep, his last words were directed to the photo of Eleanor on his bedside table. "I'll do it right this time, I promise." The week leading up to Saturday was a roller coaster of emotions for Harrison. Between transition meetings with the new vice presidents and emergency therapy sessions, a surprisingly sensible suggestion from Sandra, he found himself constantly looking at the photo of Mason on his cell phone. On Thursday, an unexpected delivery arrived at her apartment, a worn-out cardboard box with Mackenzie's handwriting on it. Inside, he found a meticulously organized photo album documenting the first 4 years of Mason's life. A note accompanied the gift. "Eleanor always kept 2 copies of every important photo. I think she knew one day you would need them. Kenzie." Harrison spent the entire night absorbing each image, a newborn Mason, tiny in his hospital crib, his first steps, leaning hesitantly on a coffee table, his first trip to the zoo, wide-eyed at a giraffe. Every moment lost was a small stab in his heart, but also a reminder of what was yet to come. On Saturday, he arrived at Mackenzie's apartment promptly at 11 a.m., carrying not only the promised pizzas, but also a small bag from the bookstore. Mason opened the door before he even rang the doorbell, as if he had been eagerly awaiting his arrival. "Mr. Harrison, you brought pizza." The boy was practically jumping with excitement, his Spider-Man pajamas replaced by a NASA t-shirt that looked new. Mason, what did we talk about opening the door alone? Mackenzie appeared behind him, but her scolding tone was soft. I'm sorry, Aunt Kenzie, but I saw through the window that it was him. Harrison couldn't help but smile. I brought something more besides pizza. He knelt down, taking a book out of his bag. I thought we could read it together after we finished the space lab. Mason's eyes widened when he saw the colorful cover of the book about the solar system. Do you have real photos of the planets? All taken by NASA. Harrison watched as his son reverently flipped through the pages. Did you know I met an astronaut once? True? Mason's exclamation made Mackenzie laugh as she took the pizzas to the kitchen. During lunch, Harrison talked about his experience at a NASA event where he met a retired astronaut. Mason absorbed every word, asking questions so insightful that Harrison sometimes forgot he was talking to a 4-year-old. Do you think I can be an astronaut when I grow up? Mason asked between bites of pizza. You can be anything you want, champ. Harrison responded automatically, but then corrected himself. But being an astronaut requires a lot of study. Mathematics, physics, physical training. Like swimming, do I do? Exactly. Every swimming lesson can be a small step towards becoming an astronaut. Mackenzie watched the interaction with a soft smile, noting how Harrison naturally adapted his language to Mason's level without being condescending. After lunch, they returned to the Lego project. Harrison found that building with Mason was a completely different experience than his business meetings. The boy had his own logic for organizing the pieces, and even when he was technically wrong, his explanation made a peculiar kind of sense. See, Mr. Harrison, if we put the scientist here, he can see the stars better, Mason explained, moving the small figure into a position that was definitely not in the manual. You know what? You're absolutely right, Harrison responded, realizing that some rules were there to be broken. At one point, while Mason went to the bathroom, Mackenzie approached Harrison. You're doing well. You think so? Sometimes I feel like I'm completely lost. All parents feel this way sometimes. She paused, considering her next words. Eleanor would be proud to see you like this. The mention of Eleanor still hurt, but in a different way now. She should be here, Kenzie, watching him grow up, correcting my mistakes. She is, in a way. In his every smile, in every curious question. Mackenzie hesitated before continuing. Mason has been asking more about her since he met you. Maybe you could share some stories. Before Harrison could respond, Mason came running back. Can we read the Book of Planets now? The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of stories about planets, memories of Eleanor, and more Lego building. As the sun began to set, Harrison realized that for the first time in years, he hadn't checked his phone once. Are you coming back tomorrow? Mason asked as they said goodbye, his eyes hopeful. Harrison looked at Mackenzie, who nodded slightly. How about we go to the planetarium? I heard they have a special exhibit about Mars. The hug he received in response was stronger and more natural than the first, and Harrison felt something inside him heal a little more. In the elevator, descending into the Manhattan night, Harrison found himself smiling. His phone buzzed, an urgent email from headquarters in London, but for once it didn't seem all that urgent. After all, he had a much more important appointment at the planetarium tomorrow. The planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History was nearly empty that Sunday morning, except for a few scattered families and a small group of students. Harrison watched Mason press his nose against the glass of a meteorite exhibit, his blue-grey eyes reflecting the soft lights of the display. Did this really come from Mars? Mason asked a third time, still in disbelief. Yes, champ. It was found in Antarctica in 1984. Harrison discreetly consulted the fact sheet he had memorized the night before, having spent hours researching astronomy to prepare for this moment. Mackenzie followed a few steps behind, her presence a silent anchor that both Mason and Harrison seemed to need in this new territory they were exploring together. She smiled as she saw Harrison bend down to Mason's level to patiently explain every detail of the exhibit. "Do you know what your mother would say about this meteorite?" Harrison asked softly, noticing how Mason immediately straightened up at the mention of Eleanor. "What?" "She would say it's proof that even the stars sometimes send us gifts." Harrison smiled, remembering a specific conversation. "She loved the idea that the universe was always sending us messages. We just needed to learn to read the signs." Mason processed this information with the seriousness only a 4-year-old can show. "Like the sign she sent for me to meet you at the cemetery." The comment caught Harrison off guard. He looked at Mackenzie, who looked equally surprised. "What do you mean, Mason?" Mackenzie walked over, kneeling beside them. "Well," Mason began, playing with the hem of his NASA t-shirt, "every night I ask Mom to send me a sign from heaven, like in the stories you tell, Aunt Kenzie. And then that day, you said we had to bring different flowers, but I insisted on white lilies because—" "Why?" Harrison could barely breathe. "Because the night before, I dreamed about Mom, and she was holding white lilies, and she smiled and pointed somewhere. Then, when I saw Mr. Harrison in the cemetery, with the same flowers—" Mason shrugged, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Harrison felt his legs give out and leaned against the nearest wall. Mackenzie had tears in her eyes. "Mason, honey, why didn't you ever tell me about that dream?" she asked softly. "I don't know. It felt like a special secret between Mom and me." He looked at Harrison with a mixture of curiosity and hope. "Do you think she really sent the dream?" Harrison swallowed the lump in his throat. "Your mother was always very good at bringing people together who needed to be together. Maybe she's still doing that." A soft announcement echoed over the sound system, informing them that the next planetarium performance would begin in 5 minutes. "Can we go?" Mason asked, jumping with excitement, the profound moment quickly replaced by childlike excitement. Inside the planetarium's dark dome, Mason sat between Harrison and Mackenzie, his small hand naturally finding Harrison's as the first stars began to appear in the vaulted ceiling. As the narrator described the constellations and nebulae that danced above them, Harrison couldn't stop thinking about Mason's dream. Eleanor had always believed in meaningful signs and coincidences, something he, as a pragmatic businessman, tended to gently dismiss. "Look, Mr. Harrison, it's Orion," Mason whispered excitedly, pointing up. "And there's Sirius, the brightest star we can see from Earth," Harrison replied, surprising himself with his own newfound knowledge. After the performance, as they walked toward the museum cafe, Mackenzie pulled Harrison aside while Mason ran ahead, still pointing at replica planets hanging from the ceiling. "You look different," she observed. "More present." "I have a lot of lost time to make up for," Harrison replied, watching Mason. "Kenzie, about what he said, about the dream. I know. It's scary how he seems to channel Eleanor sometimes, isn't it? The same intuition, the same way of seeing connections where others would see coincidences. Do you think—" Harrison hesitated. "Do you think she's really guiding us in some way?" Mackenzie smiled softly. "Eleanor always said that true love finds a path, no matter the obstacles. Maybe she was right, even if the path took 5 years to complete." At the cafe, as Mason attacked a chocolate sundae, "Just this once," Mackenzie had relented, Harrison observed his son with a new perspective. It wasn't just his physical appearance that reminded him of Eleanor, but small gestures, the way he wrinkled his nose when he thought, the way he tilted his head when something intrigued him. "Mr. Harrison," Mason called, his face stained with chocolate. "Yes, champ?" "Do you think that I could call you Dad? Not now, but maybe one day." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Harrison felt his heart swell in a way he had never experienced with any business closing or professional achievement. "I'd love that, Mason. When you feel ready." Mackenzie discreetly wiped away a tear, pretending to be busy with her coffee. The moment was interrupted by Harrison's cell phone vibrating, a reminder of an international video call scheduled for that evening. Without hesitation, he turned off the phone completely. Some stars, after all, were more important than any business in the world. The law firm Thompson & Associates occupied the entire 20th floor of a Manhattan building overlooking Bryant Park. Harrison adjusted his tie as he waited in the elegant waiting room, his fingers drumming restlessly on the arm of the leather chair. "Mr. Sullivan," the secretary called, "Mrs. Thompson is ready to welcome you." Victoria Thompson was known for her expertise in family law and her unsparing candor. At 60 years old, she still maintained the same imposing posture that had made her famous in the New York courts. "Harrison Sullivan," she greeted him, indicating the chair in front of her. "I confess that I was surprised by your call. It's not every day that a billionaire CEO asks for a consultation on parental rights. The situation is complex," Harrison began, extracting Eleanor's letter from his jacket. Victoria read the document silently, her experienced eyes taking in every potential legal nuance. "I understand that you wish to officially establish your paternal rights?" "Yes, but not to take Mason away from Mackenzie." Harrison was quick to clarify. "She's been an extraordinary mother to him. I just want to make sure I can be a part of his life legally." "And is Miss Reynolds aware of this meeting?" Harrison nodded. "Actually, it was her suggestion. After the incident at the planetarium last Sunday." "Accident?" "Mason asked me if he could call me Dad." Harrison smiled at the memory, but soon became serious. "Mackenzie said we need to establish a clear legal framework to protect his interests." Victoria removed her glasses, studying Harrison intently. "Mr. Sullivan, in my 30-year career I've seen many absent fathers try to re-enter their children's lives, most out of guilt, some out of financial interest. What motivates you?" "Love." The answer came before he could think. "Not just for Mason, but for Eleanor too. She was right about me 5 years ago. I wasn't ready to be a father. But now—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Now I understand that all those meetings, mergers, and acquisitions were just ways to fill a void I didn't even know existed." The lawyer made some notes before continuing. "Did you mention changes at your company?" "I have drastically reduced my executive responsibilities. I have delegated most of the day-to-day operations. I don't want Mason to grow up with an absent father." "What about Miss Reynolds? How does she feel about sharing custody?" "We haven't discussed details yet, but she's been incredibly understanding. In fact—" Harrison smiled slightly. "She sent me this yesterday." He showed Victoria his cell phone. On the screen, a photo of Mason sleeping, hugging a picture frame that contained a photo of Eleanor. "He's been asking a lot of questions about his mother lately," Harrison explained. "Mackenzie suggested I bring some old photos next weekend." Victoria made a few more notes before looking back at Harrison. "Mr. Sullivan, legally, your position is strong. You are the biological parent. There is no dispute about that. But cases like this are delicate. The emotional well-being of the child must always be the priority." "I completely agree. I suggest we start with a structured visitation agreement, progressing to shared custody as Mason adjusts. I can prepare the preliminary documents this week." As they discussed the legal details, Harrison's phone buzzed with a message from Mackenzie. "Mason just got a gold star in math class. Said he's practicing to be an astronaut like you suggested." Harrison showed the message to Victoria, who smiled. "You know, Mr. Sullivan, maybe your ex-wife was wrong about one thing." "What?" "She thought you couldn't be the father Mason deserved. But sometimes it's precisely absence that teaches us to value presence." After the meeting, Harrison walked through Bryant Park, watching families enjoy the late fall afternoon. A father taught his daughter to ride a bike, their laughter echoing across the grassy area. The scene reminded him of something Eleanor used to say: "Life is not measured by the moments we breathe, but by the moments that take our breath away." Her phone rang. It was Mackenzie. "How was it with Victoria?" "Well, she's going to prepare the documents for a phased visitation agreement." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Harrison, there's something I need to tell you. I found an old box of Eleanor's in the storage room. There are videos, from the day she found out she was pregnant, from the ultrasound." Harrison stopped walking. his heart racing. Did she film it? Eleanor documented everything, you know that. Do you want to come see tonight? Mason will already be asleep, but I'll be there in an hour. As he hailed an Uber, Harrison realized he was about to see a side of Eleanor he'd never known, the side that experienced the joy of carrying his son, if only for a brief moment. It was scary and wonderful at the same time. The city was just starting to turn on its lights when Harrison got into the car, but for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about meetings or financial reports. He was thinking about a woman with green eyes who, even after leaving, continued to find ways to guide him on the right path. Mackenzie's apartment was silent when Harrison arrived, except for the soft hum of the humidifier coming from Mason's room. On the coffee table, a worn shoebox waited, labelled in Eleanor's elegant handwriting, Baby S, 2018. Want a drink first? Mackenzie offered, noticing how Harrison's hands were shaking slightly as he approached the box. No, I need to be fully present for this. He sat on the couch, watching as Mackenzie connected a flash drive to the TV. There are 3 videos, she explained softly. The first is from the day she found out. The second is from the ultrasound. And the third, Mackenzie hesitated. The third one she recorded at the hospital, a few hours before. Harrison nodded, unable to form words. The blue TV screen flickered, and suddenly, there she was. Eleanor, alive and radiant, sits in her bathroom with a pregnancy test in her hands. Positive. His voice, so familiar and painfully absent, filled the room. Oh my God, it's positive. She laughed, crying at the same time. Harrison is going to be so... Well, first he'll probably panic. Then he'll start planning an entire wing of the house just for the baby. Harrison choked back a sob. That's exactly what he would have done. The next video showed Eleanor at the ultrasound clinic, Mackenzie clearly holding the camera. Look, Kenzie, it's so tiny. You can hardly believe there's a whole human being in there. Do you want to know the sex? The technician's voice asked off-camera. No, not yet. Eleanor smiled, her eyes shining. I want to see Harrison's face when we find out together. Harrison felt Mackenzie squeeze his hand gently. The last video started playing, and the change was brutal. Eleanor was pale, lying in a hospital bed, tubes and monitors around her. My love, she began, her voice weak but determined. If you're seeing this, it means things didn't go as we planned. The doctors say the baby has a chance, and that's what I'm holding on to right now. She paused, breathing hard. I know you're going to be angry when you find out I asked Kenzie to raise our son. You're going to think I didn't trust you, that I didn't give you a chance. But Harrison, my stubborn workaholic, it's not a lack of trust, it's an excess of knowledge. Eleanor adjusted the camera, bringing her face closer. You're brilliant at business because you dedicate yourself completely to it. But a baby needs presence, time, moments that can't be rescheduled or delegated. It needs someone who's there for the first steps, the first words, the nightmares in the middle of the night. Tears streamed silently down Harrison's face as Eleanor continued. So, I made this impossible choice. I gave our greatest treasure to Kenzie, to keep until you were ready. Not because I didn't love you. Heavens, I love you so much it hurts. But because sometimes love means protecting people from themselves. She smiled, that smile that always lit up any room. But I know you, Harrison Sullivan. I know that when you find out about our son, you will want to change the world to be worthy of him. And when that day comes, because it will come, I ask only one thing. Do not blame Kenzie. She carried this secret out of love for the 3 of us. The video ended, leaving the room in deafening silence. Harrison remained still, processing Eleanor's last words. She was right, you know. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse. About everything. About how I was. About how I needed to change. Eleanor has always had a gift for seeing the best in people, Mackenzie replied softly. Even when they couldn't see it in themselves. A small noise from the hallway made them turn around. Mason was standing in the doorway of his room, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Aunt Kenzie." "I heard Mum's voice." Harrison and Mackenzie exchanged quick glances before she stood up. "It was just a video, honey. Shall we go back to bed?" "Can I see it too?" Mason asked, his gaze switching between the adults. Harrison stood up, approaching cautiously. "How about we do this tomorrow, all together? Your mother left you some very special stories." Mason considered the proposal for a moment. "Promise?" "I promise, champ." Harrison hesitated before opening his arms. To his surprise and delight, Mason ran up to hug him. As Mackenzie carried Mason back to bed, Harrison remained in the living room, staring at the now dark TV screen. Somewhere, he was sure, Eleanor was smiling, pleased that her plan had finally worked. His phone buzzed, an email from Victoria Thompson's office with the preliminary custody documents. Harrison ignored him. Tomorrow would be an important day, the day to share with Mason the memories of his mother, to begin to build a bridge between the past and the future. When Mackenzie returned, she found Harrison carefully organizing the flash drive and shoebox. "Are you well?" "No," he answered honestly, "but I'll stay. For him, for her." "For all of us," Mackenzie corrected softly, and Harrison realized that us now meant something completely new, a family built on love, loss, and ultimately redemption. The next morning Harrison woke up before the alarm, his hands still tingling with the tangible memory of Eleanor's videos. The decision to share those memories with Mason weighed heavily on her chest. How do you explain to a 4-year-old boy the complexity of his mother's love and choices? After a quick call to Sandra cancelling her morning meetings, Harrison stopped at a candy store in the West Village. The place, small and cozy, was one of Eleanor's favourites. As he waited for the chocolate croissants that Mason loved, according to Mackenzie, his eyes caught a reflection in the glass of the display case. For a moment, he thought he saw Eleanor smiling at him, as she often did when she caught him planning a surprise. "Have you decided how you're going to show him the videos?" Mackenzie asked when Harrison arrived at the apartment, balancing a box of candy and a restored picture frame he'd found in the back of his closet. "I thought I'd start with the physical photos," Harrison replied, watching Mason devour a croissant. "Build a tangible connection first." Mason was curiously looking at the picture frame in Harrison's hands. "Are you Mommy?" "Yes, champ." Harrison sat on the rug next to his son, gently wiping some chocolate from the corner of his mouth. "This photo was taken on our wedding day. Your mother was so happy she literally glowed." In the photo, Eleanor laughed openly, her brown curls decorated with tiny white flowers, as Harrison twirled her around on the dance floor. The photographer had perfectly captured the moment, the pure joy in their eyes, the way their fingers intertwined. "She was very pretty," Mason commented, running his fingers over the image. "Why is she wearing flowers in her hair?" "Because they were white lilies," Mackenzie replied softly, joining them on the carpet. "Like the ones you take her." Harrison swallowed hard before continuing. "Mason, your mum, she left you some special messages. Like video letters. Want to see them?" The boy's eyes widened. "Did she talk to me?" "Yes, in a way." Harrison looked at Mackenzie, who nodded encouragingly. "But first, I need to tell you a story about how your mother was the bravest person I ever knew." For the next hour, Harrison and Mackenzie alternated telling stories about Eleanor, how she always carried Band-Aids in her bag in case she found an injured animal, how he organized surprise picnics in Central Park on workdays, forcing Harrison to take breaks from his hectic schedule. "She also liked astronomy?" Mason asked when Harrison mentioned stargazing nights. "I loved it. I knew the names of all the constellations." Harrison smiled, remembering. "That's actually how we met. She was giving a talk on astronomy at NYU, and I was in the wrong place looking for a business conference." "But did you stay to hear about the stars?" Mason asked, completely engrossed in the story. "I stayed. It was the best decision I ever made." Harrison exchanged a meaningful look with Mackenzie before continuing. "Mason, when your mum found out you were coming, she was so happy she started filming everything. Want to see?" The boy nodded vigorously, snuggling between Harrison and Mackenzie as the first video started playing. The image of Eleanor in the bathroom, beaming with the news of her pregnancy, filled the screen. "It's her voice," Mason exclaimed, leaning forward. "Is she talking about me?" "Yes, about you. Still very small, the size of a pea." Harrison explained, his heart clenching at how Mason hung in on Eleanor's every word. When they got to the ultrasound video, Mason was fascinated by the hazy image on the screen. "Is that little dot me?" "That little dancing dot is you," Mackenzie confirmed, hugging him. "Your mother said you were already fussy even then." Harrison hesitated before the last video. "Mason, this next one, your mom was in the hospital when she recorded it. She really wanted you to know how much she loved you, even though she couldn't be here." Eleanor's pale face appeared on the screen, but her smile still lit up the entire room. "My little miracle," she began. "I still don't know if you will be a boy or a girl, but I already love you more than all the stars in the sky." Mason watched in absolute silence, big tears rolling down his cheeks as Eleanor talked about her dreams for the baby, about how she hoped he or she would inherit Harrison's love of discovery and her own passion for the stars. When the video ended, Mason remained quiet for a long moment before turning to Harrison. "She wanted you to be my father." "Yes, champ. She just wanted to make sure I was ready to be the best father possible for you." Harrison responded, his voice cracking. "And now you are?" The question, so simple and so profound, hit Harrison like a bolt of lightning. "I'm trying. With all my heart." Mason processed this for a moment before throwing himself into Harrison's arms, sobbing softly. "Can I call you Dad now?" Harrison hugged his son, his own tears mixing with the boy's hair. "You can, son. Yes, you can." Mackenzie watched the scene with teary eyes, thinking about how Eleanor would have loved to see this moment. Outside, the autumn sun shone through the windows, creating a golden halo around father and son, as if Eleanor was somehow blessing their new beginning. A week after the videos were revealed, Harrison found himself redesigning his life with the same precision he used to dedicate to business plans for Sullivan Enterprises. The guest room in his penthouse had been transformed into a space fit for a little astronaut, walls painted deep blue with phosphorescent constellations, a spaceship-shaped bed, and a bookshelf filled with books about the universe. "Don't you think you're exaggerating a little?" Mackenzie asked, watching as Harrison supervised the installation of a small planetarium on the ceiling. "Maybe," he admitted, adjusting Orion's position, "but I want him to have his own space here, for when he's ready." The joint custody documents had been finalized the day before, establishing a gradual schedule that would begin with weekend visits. Victoria Thompson had praised their maturity in putting Mason's needs first. "Mason is so excited about Sunday's party," Mackenzie commented, running her fingers over a moon globe on the nightstand. "He already told his whole class about his astronaut dad." Harrison laughed. "I haven't had the courage to fix that part yet, although I've watched every space documentary I can find on Netflix." The sound of the elevator announced Sandra's arrival, carrying several folders. "Mr. Sullivan, you brought the documents you requested regarding the new corporate structure." Since assuming his role as a father, Harrison had implemented revolutionary changes at Sullivan Enterprises. The new management model not only reduced his working hours, but also offered more flexible policies for employees with children, something he now realized was crucially important. "Sandra, can you cancel my trip to Chicago next week?" Harrison asked, still focused on the planetarium. "It's Mason's first swimming performance." "I already cancelled yesterday, sir," Sandra smiled, "and I rescheduled the conference for video conferencing." Mackenzie watched the interaction with a soft smile. It was evident that the change in Harrison wasn't just superficial. It radiated from him in waves, affecting everyone around him. "Kenzie," Harrison called after Sandra left, "there's something I want to show you." He guided her to his office, where an entire wall had been transformed into a photo mural. In the center, the last photo of Eleanor, radiant in her blue dress in Central Park. All around, like satellites orbiting a bright sun, were photos of Mason that Mackenzie had shared over the years. "It's beautiful," she whispered, gently touching a photo of baby Mason. "I want him to grow up knowing all your stories, the ones Eleanor left and the ones you kept." Harrison hesitated before continuing. "You know I'll never try to replace your role in his life, right?" Mackenzie turned to face him, unshed tears shining in her eyes. "I know, and Eleanor also knew this day would come. That's why she recorded that last video. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a passing of the baton." Harrison's phone buzzed with a message, a photo of Mason at his swim class, proudly showing off a new Progress armband. "He's growing up so fast," Harrison murmured. "Kids have that habit." Mackenzie laughed softly, "but you still have a lot of time to make up for it." The conversation was interrupted by another message, this time a video from Mason's teacher. In the clip, the boy was in front of his class, presenting his project about the solar system. "And here," Mason excitedly pointed to a meticulously constructed model, "is where my father works with the stars. He met my mother at an astronomy lecture, and now he teaches me about all the constellations." Harrison felt his heart swell with pride and love. "I think I need to study more astronomy," he joked, but his voice was choked with emotion. "You're doing great, Harrison," Mackenzie assured, squeezing his arm gently. "Eleanor would be proud." The rest of the afternoon was dedicated to final preparations for Sunday's party, father and son's first official celebration. Harrison had rented the entire planetarium for a private showing, followed by a lunch where Mason could show his school friends all the constellations he was learning about. As they finalized the details, Harrison realized that he was, for the first time in years, truly happy. It wasn't the ephemeral happiness of closing a big deal or seeing the company's shares rise. It was something deeper, more meaningful. It was the happiness Eleanor always wanted for him, the one that came from real connections, from shared moments, from unconditional love. It was the happiness of a man who finally found his true north in the stars of his son's eyes. The planetarium's private lounge was decorated with a charming mix of space elements and personal touches. Harrison watched proudly as Mason excitedly explained to his schoolmates how each constellation had its own story. It was Sunday, the day of the party that would officially mark their new beginning as father and son. "And that one over there," Mason pointed to a particularly bright projection, "is my mom's favorite constellation. Dad told me they used to look at it together." Harrison's heart melted hearing Mason use Daddy so naturally. Over the past few weeks, the word had become more and more frequent, each occurrence sounding like music to his ears. "He absorbed every detail you taught him," Mackenzie commented, approaching with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Eleanor would love to see that." The party had been carefully planned to reflect both Mason's love of space and memories of Eleanor. Small details, like the white lilies strategically placed among the space decorations and the photos of her smiling amidst the projected stars, created a magical atmosphere of past and present, intertwined. "Mr. Sullivan?" Mason's teacher, Mrs. Bennett, approached with a warm smile. "I have to say that Mason has been extraordinarily engaged in science class ever since you started taking a more active part in his life. Yesterday he gave a little impromptu talk about nebulae to the class." Harrison laughed, remembering the hours he spent studying basic astronomy so he could answer his son's endless questions. "He is a natural teacher. The other day he corrected me on the position of Jupiter." The party continued with a special performance in the planetarium, where a professional astronomer, hired by Harrison, took the children on a journey through the solar system. Mason sat on his father's lap, his eyes shining with each new discovery, even those he already knew by heart. "Dad," Mason whispered during the introduction, "when I'm an astronaut, I'm going to take pictures of all the stars for you and Mum." Harrison swallowed the lump in his throat, hugging his son tighter. "I'm sure your mother is already proud of you, champ." During the lunch that followed, Harrison observed how Mason naturally moved between his 2 worlds, the curious boy who grew up under Mackenzie's loving care, and the son who was now discovering the joy of having a father there. It was a delicate dance, but Mason performed it with a grace that surprised everyone. "He's handling all of this better than any of us," Mackenzie commented, watching Mason show off his new birthday telescope to his friends. "Children have incredible resilience," Harrison replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes I wonder if Eleanor knew this when she made her decision, if she anticipated that Mason would be strong enough to navigate all this complexity." "Eleanor has always seen the best in people," Mackenzie smiled softly, "including you, even when you couldn't see it in yourself." The afternoon progressed with educational games about space, shared stories, and lots of laughter. Harrison had hired a photographer to document every moment, determined not to miss another precious moment of his son's life. Near the end of the party, Mason pulled Harrison and Mackenzie close to the large telescope set up on the planetarium's balcony. "Look, Dad, it's that star that Mommy liked the most." Harrison adjusted the telescope, allowing Mason to get a better look. "Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. Your mother said he was like a beacon guiding lost travelers home." "How did she guide us to each other?" Mason asked innocently, but with a wisdom that made both adults hold their breath. "Exactly like that, son," Harrison replied, exchanging an emotional look with Mackenzie. When the last guest left, Mason fell asleep in the car on the drive to Mackenzie's apartment, hugging his new telescope. Harrison carried his sleeping son to his bed, taking a moment to look at his serene face. "You know," he said quietly to Mackenzie, who was watching from the doorway, "for years I thought success meant numbers on a bank account or titles on an office door. But looking at it now—" "You finally understand what Eleanor has always known," Mackenzie added softly. "That true success is measured in moments like these," Harrison agreed, adjusting the astronaut blanket over Mason, "in smiles, in shared discoveries, in unconditional love." Upon leaving the room, Harrison stopped to look at a photo of Eleanor in the hallway. She was smiling, holding a book about constellations. "Thank you," he whispered to the image, "for not giving up on me, even when I had given up on myself." The Manhattan night sky shone through the windows, the stars competing with the city lights. Somewhere up there, Harrison knew, Eleanor was smiling, pleased to see her plan finally come to fruition, not just in the form of a father and son reunited, but in the complete transformation of a man who had finally learned to prioritize what really mattered in life. The transition from fall to winter in New York brought more changes than just the golden leaves giving way to the first snowflakes. Harrison's penthouse, once a monument to his loneliness, now vibrated with Mason's energy during their weekends together. The boys' room had become the heart of the apartment, its starry walls bearing witness to the stories father and son shared every night. And then, Harrison continued the story, Mason curled up on his lap in the chair, specially positioned under the ceiling planetarium. His mother decided we needed a bigger telescope. She literally dragged the old one out onto the porch in the middle of the night because she was sure she would see a comet. "Did she see it?" Mason asked, his eyes heavy with sleep but still sparkling with curiosity. "Not that night, but she didn't give up. She spent a whole week waking up at 3 a.m, until finally—" Harrison smiled at the memory. "Until she shook me so hard, I almost fell out of bed. The comet was there, just as she predicted." Their routine had become established, with a naturalness that surprised everyone. On Thursday nights, Harrison would leave the office early to attend Mason's swimming lessons. On Saturdays, they explored the city, museums, parks, or simply walking through different neighborhoods, Mason always asking questions about everything he saw. Mackenzie watched this evolution with a mix of joy and nostalgia. "He's changing," she commented, during one of the weekly dinners they had set up to discuss Mason's routine. "Not just physically, but in confidence, in curiosity." "It's like he finally has all the pieces to the puzzle," Harrison replied, pouring more wine. "You gave him strong roots, Kenzie. I'm just helping with the wings." The metaphor made Mackenzie smile. Eleanor used that same expression. Roots and wings. She said they were the two greatest gifts we could give a child. Harrison's phone buzzed with a notification from Mason's school app. He had been selected to represent his class at next month's science fair. The project? An interactive model of the solar system that showed not only the planets, but also the main constellations visible from each of them. He's combining his passion for astronomy with engineering skills, Harrison commented, showing the notification to Mackenzie. I think he inherited the best from the three of us, Eleanor's creativity, her ability to take care of details, and my perfectionism, Mackenzie added with a laugh. He remade the model from the last presentation 3 times because the orbits were not mathematically accurate. The sound of small footsteps interrupted the conversation. Mason appeared in the room, still in his rocket pajamas, hugging his favorite book about nebulae. Dad, can I show Aunt Kenzie something? Harrison nodded, watching as Mason opened the book to a specific page. It was a photo of the Ring Nebula, its blue and purple hues forming a mesmerizing pattern. Look, Aunt Kenzie. It looks like the ring Mom is wearing in that wedding photo, Mason pointed out excitedly. Dad said maybe she chose that ring because she already loved the stars. Mackenzie swallowed hard, remembering the day Eleanor had chosen that particular ring. Your father is right, dear. Your mother said she wanted to carry a little piece of the universe with her always. Harrison watched the interaction with a heavy heart. It was in these moments that Eleanor's absence hurt most, when Mason made connections so deep and meaningful that they seemed to come directly from her. How about we make hot chocolate, and you tell us more about your science fair project? Harrison suggested, noticing how Mason's eyes lit up at the mention of his performance. As they prepared drinks in the kitchen, Mason excitedly explained his plans, gesturing with his small hands. And then, when people press the button on each planet, the constellations will light up. Aunt Kenzie will help me with the LED lights, right? Of course, love, Mackenzie smiled, exchanging a knowing look with Harrison. They had agreed to share project responsibilities. She would handle the electrical work while Harrison would help with orbit calculations. You know, Mason continued, blowing on his hot chocolate, I think Mom would like my project. She liked teaching people about stars, just like I want to do. She would love that, son. Harrison ran his hand through the boy's hair, identical to his own. Actually, I have something to show you later. I found a video of her giving a lecture on astronomy at the university. Mason's face lit up at the possibility of seeing another piece of his mother's story. This was how they were building their relationship, through shared memories, rediscovered stories, and new moments created together. Later, when Mason finally fell asleep among his planet models and design sketches, Harrison and Mackenzie remained in the room, contemplating how their lives had intertwined in ways they never imagined. Sometimes I wonder, Harrison spoke softly, if Eleanor knew it would happen like this, if she foresaw that we would need each other to raise her son in the best way possible. Eleanor has always had a gift for seeing the constellations in our lives, Mackenzie replied, even when they seemed like just scattered stars. Outside, snow was beginning to fall gently over Manhattan, covering the city in a blanket of white that seemed to reflect the starlight. In his room, Mason dreamed of nebulae and comets, while his guardians continued to weave the threads of a family that transcended conventional ties, united by the love of a woman who, even when absent, continued to guide their paths through the cosmos. The Riverside Elementary School Science Fair was buzzing with activity on a particularly cold Saturday morning in December. Mason's project, strategically positioned in the center of the gym, was already attracting curious looks even before the event officially started. The model of the solar system, the result of weeks of collaborative work between father and son, was a moving work of art. Are you sure the orbits are accurate? Mason asked for the 3rd time, adjusting his small blazer, a miniature of the one Harrison often wore for important performances. Perfect math, champ. Harrison smiled, recognizing his own tendency towards perfectionism reflected in his son. Your mother always said that stars don't have to be perfect to be beautiful. Mackenzie arrived carrying a box with extra batteries for the LED lights that illuminated the constellations. Is anyone nervous? She asked, noticing how Mason was slightly bouncing his feet. No, the boy replied quickly, then paused. Maybe a little. What if people don't understand about nebulae? Then you explain again. Harrison knelt down to his son's level. Remember what we found out about your mother. She gave the same lecture over and over until everyone understood. Mason's face lit up with the memory of the video they had watched together, where Eleanor patiently explained star formation to a class of freshmen. She never gave up, right? Never, Mackenzie confirmed, fixing Mason's bow tie. And you have the same sparkle in your eyes that she had when she talked about the stars. The judges began their rounds of the gym, and Mason instantly transformed. Nervousness gave way to surprising confidence for someone so young. Harrison watched in amazement as his son explained with scientific precision and occasional childish enthusiasm how each planet influenced the visibility of the different constellations. And here, Mason pointed to a particular detail in his model, when Mars is in this position, we can see the constellation Orion perfectly aligned with the Ring Nebula, which is like my mother's wedding ring. The judges exchanged glances, impressed not only by the technical precision of the project, but by the personal connection Mason had made with the material. Harrison felt his heart swell with pride. During lunch break, while Mason was showing off his project to his classmates, Victoria Thompson unexpectedly appeared in the gym. "I came to see how my favorite client is doing," she explained with a warm smile, "and I confess that I'm impressed, not just with the project, but with the three of you." Harrison followed her gaze to where Mason stood, now flanked by Mackenzie, who was helping explain the electrical system to a group of curious parents. "You know," Victoria continued, "in 20 years of family law, I have rarely seen a non-traditional situation work so well. You have created something special here." Eleanor knew what she was doing, Harrison replied softly. Even when it felt like she was tearing us apart, she was actually building a bridge to the future. The award ceremony started late in the afternoon. Mason held Harrison and Mackenzie's hands as the judges announced the winners of each category. When it was the turn of the astronomy category, time seemed to slow down. First place, for a project that demonstrates not only technical excellence, but also a deep understanding of the connection between science and humanity, goes to Mason Sullivan. The gym erupted in applause. Mason jumped for joy, hugging first Harrison, then Mackenzie, before running onto the stage. As he received his trophy, his eyes shone with a light that perfectly resembled Eleanor. "I want to thank my dad, who helped me with the calculations," Mason began his little thank you speech, his voice clear and confident. "To my Aunt Kenzie, who always takes care of me and helped me with the lights. And—" He paused, looking up as if searching for something on the gym ceiling. "My mother, who is in the stars and taught me through her stories that the universe is full of love." There wasn't a dry eye in the gym. Harrison felt Mackenzie squeeze his hand, silently sharing the emotional moment. Later, as they carefully stored the winning design, which would be permanently displayed in the school's main hallway, Mason asked a question that caught both adults by surprise. "Dad, Aunt Kenzie, do you think Mom planned all this? Like the planet's orbits that line up perfectly?" Harrison and Mackenzie exchanged a meaningful look. It was a question too profound for a 4-year-old, but also perfectly in line with the sensitivity Mason had inherited from Eleanor. "I think your mother knew that some constellations take time to form," Harrison replied carefully. "Like our little solar system here. You, me, Aunt Kenzie, all orbiting around her love." Mason considered this for a moment, his face as serious as when studying a new fact about astronomy. "Like a family of stars." "Just like a family of stars," Mackenzie agreed, hugging him. Snow was beginning to fall softly outside as they left the school, Mason's trophy shining in the parking lot lights. Harrison carried his sleepy son in his arms, while Mackenzie followed behind with the project box. "Father?" Mason murmured against his shoulder. "Yes, champ. I think Mom is proud of us today." Harrison looked up at the night sky, where a few stubborn stars shone through the snow. "I'm sure you will, son. I'm sure you will." A year had passed since the science fair, and the small, non-traditional family's life had found its own heavenly rhythm. Harrison's office at Sullivan Enterprises now boasted not only financial charts, but also colorful drawings of planets and the trophy Mason had won, a constant reminder of his realigned priorities. On this particular December morning, Harrison was adjusting his tie as he watched Mason sleep in his starry bedroom. It was the day of his son's swimming recital, and it also marked exactly 18 months since the encounter in the cemetery that had changed their lives forever. "Is he still sleeping?" Mackenzie whispered, quietly entering the room. She had arrived early to help with the preparations for the special day. "Like an asteroid in stable orbit," Harrison replied with a smile, using one of the space analogies that had become a natural part of his vocabulary. Mason slowly woke up, his blue-grey eyes blinking against the soft light coming through the window. "Today is the day!" he exclaimed, sitting up abruptly. The swimming recital was more than just a school performance. Mason had decided that each movement in the water would represent a different celestial body, transforming his performance into an aquatic dance of the solar system. The idea had come to him during one of his nightly stargazing sessions with Harrison. "Remember," Mason explained as they ate breakfast, "when I spin backwards, that's Saturn completing its orbit." Harrison and Mackenzie exchanged knowing smiles. Mason's creativity in combining his two passions, swimming and astronomy, was pure Eleanor. It was in these moments that his absence turned into an almost tangible presence, like a distant star whose light continues to travel through space, long after its source has faded. At the school pool, the stands were packed with anxious parents with cameras in hand. Harrison had made sure Sandra recorded every moment, not only for her personal archive, but also to add to the growing collection of memories they were building for Mason. "Nervous?" Harrison asked, adjusting his son's swim cap. "No," Mason replied with that confidence that was so reminiscent of Eleanor. "The stars will guide me, just as they guided you to me." The simplicity and depth of the answer hit Harrison like a wave. Beside her, Mackenzie discreetly wiped away a tear. Mason's presentation was the last of the day. When he entered the pool, the entire gym went silent. The music began, a special composition that mixed NASA space sounds with a gentle melody. Every movement in the water told a story, arms spinning like the Milky Way, legs beating to the rhythm of pulsars, the entire body flowing like a nebula in formation. It was science and art, technique and emotion, all perfectly balanced in the performance of a 5-year-old boy who carried the universe in his heart. "Eleanor would be over the moon," Mackenzie whispered to Harrison, both mesmerized by Mason's water dance. "She is," Harrison replied softly, "in his every movement, in every smile, in every discovery." When Mason emerged from the pool to enthusiastic applause from the audience, his smile lit up the entire gym. She ran first to Harrison, then to Mackenzie, hugging them with all the strength of her small, wet arms. "Did you see? I did all the constellations right." "We did, champ. It was perfect." Harrison wrapped him in a soft towel. "Your mother would have loved every second of it." Later, as they celebrated at Mason's favorite restaurant, a dinosaur-themed place that he insisted had a connection to asteroids, Harrison watched as his son had become the gravitational center that kept everyone in perfect orbit. Him, Mackenzie, Eleanor's memories, even the team at Sullivan Enterprises, who had learned to prioritize family over deadlines. "Dad," Mason called, interrupting his thoughts, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, son." "Last night, when you and Aunt Kenzie thought I was sleeping, I was actually looking at the stars out the window. And do you know what I saw?" Harrison and Mackenzie leaned in, curious. "I saw a shooting star, just like the one Mum saw in that story you told me, and I made the same wish as her." "And what was it?" Mackenzie asked softly. "I asked my family to always stay together, like the stars in a constellation." Mason smiled, that smile that was pure Eleanor. "And I think it worked, because look, we're all here." Harrison felt his heart expand like a supernova. "Yes, son, we are all here, and we always will be." That night, after putting Mason to bed, Harrison and Mackenzie stood on the apartment's balcony, sharing a quiet moment under the starry Manhattan sky. "Do you know what Eleanor told me once?" Mackenzie broke the silence. "That some people are like stars. Even when we can't see them, their light continues to guide us." "She was right," Harrison replied, his eyes fixed on the night sky. Like always. A movement caught their eye. Mason, in his rocket pajamas, had silently joined them. Can't sleep, champ. I wanted to see the stars a little more, he replied, snuggling between them. Can I? Together, the three watched the night sky, each lost in their own thoughts, but connected by bonds stronger than gravity. This was how Eleanor had imagined them, Harrison realized, not as a traditional family, but as a unique constellation, each member shining with their own light, but eternally connected to the others. And somewhere, beyond the stars she loved so much, Eleanor smiled, pleased to see her last and greatest gift finally complete. A family that transcended earthly conventions, united by the love that, like starlight, travels eternally through time and space.